Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to our Park Hills neighbors, and thank you for being here to discuss EMBER, wildfire mitigation and resiliency here in Berkeley. Just so you know, we're trying a little bit of a different Zoom format tonight since we're all a neighborhood and a smaller group. Using the meeting format instead of webinar so you can see each other in the tiny little boxes, and we're hoping that this makes it feel like a community gathering and really want it to be like that, just a community gathering that we're doing on Zoom. So in this format, it's really important that you try and keep your Zoom mics off, called on to ask a question, just so we can all hear each other. We're going to take questions virtually and verbally after the presentation is over. And so we'll ask you to raise your virtual hand on Zoom at that time after the presentation. So please don't raise your hand until that time. Otherwise, everyone's pictures will kind of move around as you do raise your hands. And we'll call on people with questions at that point. We do want to take as many questions as we can. Colin, Arnold, our assistant chief, has a hard stop at 7:30, but I'll stick around as long as possible to answer questions. When you are called on, then you can unmute yourself to ask your question and then mute yourself again when we're done. As you noticed, we are recording the meeting and we'll share the link next week with everyone who registered. Again, I'm super impressed. We've got 60 people from Park Hills. We had more than 100 people RSVP. This is a topic that means a lot to a lot of people, and I just appreciate everybody joining us. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Brent Blackaby, your new council member. I'm in month 3 of the job. It's been an honor already and a privilege to be able to serve this community on the council. I knew when I was running during the campaign, and it'd been drilled into me by Susan Wengraf over many, many months, that wildfire safety was always going to be my top priority. And then obviously in January, once we saw what happened in Los Angeles with the devastation with the wildfires there, and the fact that they traveled all the way from the hills to the water, and all the wealth of lessons that we've learned since that time, it's even more important. I'm even more committed to this work. We've been working our office on a daily basis with Chief Sprague, with Assistant Chief Colin Arnold, and other council colleagues on this issue. And we're going to continue to do it in the weeks and months ahead. There's just nothing more important, for our part of Berkeley than getting this right. So really quickly, just at the beginning, a quick show of hands, if you wouldn't mind, this audience participation. Who is not familiar with the EMBER proposal? Because we're going to use this to calibrate how we talk about this. Can you hit the raise hand button if you're not familiar? Just that would be helpful for us to see. And I'm going to do a quick count. And Lori, maybe you're getting an observation of this as well. Okay. Great.
So far,
So I think they're
people.
Great. So yeah, so there are definitely some people who are not familiar. A lot of people are. So we will give an overview of EMBER, but again, I think we want to leave a lot of time for questions and very specific questions, so that'll help us kind of calibrate. So go ahead and put your hands down. We'll dive in. I really do hope that at the conclusion of this evening, you'll feel more informed and energized about EMBER, about the promise of making our city dramatically safer from a wildfire that would consume and kind of travel across the city, and keeping Park Hills safe as part of that process as well. We're here to answer your questions and get your feedback, but we're also early in the consideration process. The City Council is going to meet again on March 25th to take this back up and potentially vote to move this forward. But I talked to Cindy Rosenthal before we do that. I wanted to make sure that we had a chance to engage as a neighborhood to get your feedback, answer your questions, and potentially make some tweaks depending on what we hear from this group tonight. And so again, I really appreciate everybody being here. Since Park Hills is squarely in this new kind of Grizzly Peak mitigation zone that Colin's going to tell us about a little bit later, we definitely wanted you to be part of this process. So very quickly for the evening, and then I'll get out of the way. Assistant Chief Colin Arnold is going to talk about EMBER in a second, which is what the city is asking each of us to do, you and me and all of our neighbors, individual homeowners. And I understand it is a big ask, but we wouldn't be making it if it weren't an important ask. I live on Grizzly Peak Boulevard. I'm going to be doing all of the things that you're being asked to do as well. So this is personal to all of us. I just want to say I understand that this is a big ask. This is not easy. To set the context, I also want you to know that it's not just homeowners like us that are being asked to step up. This is a collective response. It requires collective action. And we have a lot of regional partners who are also being asked to participate. And so just for some quick context setting before we go into EMBER, I just wanted to give people a heads up on a few of those things. Lori, could you put the slides up? Thank you. I've met just in these last 3 months with all of the partner agencies that are involved. Each has expressed their deep commitment to making Berkeley safer from wildfire and doing their part. Do we want everybody to be doing more? Absolutely, right? And part of my job on city council and sure that we're holding people accountable for living up to the commitments that they make. We're asking neighborhoods to make commitments. We're asking you to make commitments. It's only reasonable that we also ask our partners to make commitments. And frankly, look, all these partners also want to keep their buildings, their land, and their work thriving as well. So they also have a stake in the game. So let me just tick very quickly. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a representative list of the partners that we're talking about. So starting with Lawrence Berkeley Lab, right, just down the street from us. I just learned from their team this week that they're removing 55 dead, dying, and other hazardous eucalyptus trees around the lab's main entrance off Cyclotron Road. They're thinning clustered groups of trees, removing leaf litter, and that work is all going to keep the lab, UC Berkeley, and us safer, right, from wildfires. That's one example. The East Bay Regional Park District, that's the big elephant in the room, right? We're all thinking about Tilden Park. That's the most likely path that a fire would come that affects us. Elizabeth Eccles, who Regional Park District representative, I think was going to also try and be here tonight. We asked and we've talked to her about what the Park District is doing. Last year, they treated about 1,200 acres to reduce hazardous fuels district-wide. And in this coming year, they've set aside $9.4 million. There's also an additional $4 million that may come through FEMA to do more vegetation management. We're concerned about eucalyptus. We're concerned about vegetation, right? There's more to do, but they are doing work. And I just want to kind of acknowledge that. They also have their own professional firefighting team led by Fire Chief Aileen Thaley, who you might remember from past safety meetings. And so again, they have, again, a firefighting team that supports the district. UC Berkeley, another big and important neighbor, they're ramping up their efforts to establish a Firewise community that targets the 2 residence halls in our own very high fire severity zone. They're also doing removal of eucalyptus and hazardous vegetation on their property. PG&E, I wish they were undergrounding every line, right? That's not going to happen in the short term. However, right, the big tool in their arsenal right now are the PSPS, the power shutoffs in fire weather and extreme fire weather, right? That's one thing they're doing. It's a blunt instrument, but to try and not spark or ignite a fire on those days. They're also doing vegetation management. They're cutting tree limbs away from high voltage lines. You can contact them to request trimming if you see something, especially touching or near a high voltage line. They did stop their undergrounding program, but before they stopped the program, Councilmember Wengraf secured utility district number 48. That is going forward, and there's going to be more than 100 homes in the Grizzly Peak Summit area that will have their lines undergrounded. So that's slated in 2027. Again, more pressure to put on PG&E. Senator Arreguín chairs the Public Safety Committee in the State Senate. This is going to be a priority for us to keep the pressure on there. East Bay Wildfire Coalition of Governments. This is a new body that Councilmember Wengraf started last year. Myself and Shoshana O'Keefe, who represents District 5, sit on this body. It's a regional consortium of elected officials that represent all of kind of the related districts here on our side of the bay. We're working together. We meet about once every couple of months to talk about plans. We had just a presentation from East Bay MUD last time, as well as Assistant Chief Arnold, who is sharing what BFD is working on. We're trying to do more coordination and collaboration to make sure that we're all working together and not at cross purposes. It also gives us a greater voice to then lobby PG&E or lobby the Park District or others when all the communities are sort of speaking together with one voice. Berkeley Fire Safe Council. This is a nonprofit organization. De Niro heads it up right now. They organize cleanups of eucalyptus groves, mostly on private property. Last year, they removed 134 blue gum eucalyptus trees from private property. They secured grant funding to do that, and they have another ambitious agenda ahead for the coming year. Next slide. A couple others just to talk about, and then I will hand it over to Colin. Firewise communities. Park Hills was one of the first. That's the purple shaded area, which you're all familiar with, right there abutting Tilden Park. We've now got 14 Firewise communities. Those are all the shaded areas. Most of the Grizzly Peak Ridge is represented by different Firewise communities that represent different neighborhoods. These communities are all working collaboratively with their own neighbors, and now they are also organizing the different Firewise communities are also getting together once a month to talk about the work that they're doing and sharing best practices. These are really essential building blocks of the work that Colin's going to be telling us about, block neighbor to neighbor communication to get like universal participation. I think Firewise is really kind of a secret weapon in this. And I want to use this for the organizing and mobilizing potential that we have. If we can get more and more of the hills represented by Firewise, this is really a good way for the fire department and our local neighbors to work together through this. And lastly, just to talk really quickly about East Bay Mud. I know many folks are concerned about the water supply. We saw what happened in LA. We don't want similar things to happen here. They did present at this East Bay Wildfire Coalition meeting a couple of weeks ago. This is just one representative slide from the deck. They are thinking about water pressure, pumping plants, how to service particular areas with more than one pump. So if one fails, they have fail safes to make sure they can be getting water to the neighborhoods that need it at the time that they need it. They've also installed extra generators, diesel powered generators at pumping stations throughout those red flag and PSPS days, so that if the power's out, they have alternative power to basically power the pumping that would need to happen. They also have a strategy for how they use the reservoirs and the tanks. They fill the tanks and reservoirs with more water during fire season so that more water is available at that point. I'm checking to confirm. We have one. People have asked about Summit Reservoir. I'm also thinking about that water tank near Woodhaven that's not too far from y'all that I think has been empty. But whether that's also part of the strategy of, again, filling during fire season, I'll be following up on that. They checked every hydrant in Berkeley's high fire hazard zone last year. They do that routinely to make sure that they're operational, but they did it as recently as last year to make sure those hydrants are functioning. Next slide. And they have their own vegetation management program. Goats grazing on more than 10,000 acres last year. They've done mechanical treatments in targeted areas. They've cleared 150 miles of fire roads. They're also on a number of projects, including with our own fire department on work like the Grizzly Peak project, where we're removing hazardous fuels, the Grizzly Peak Strategic Fuel Break, and the San Pablo Pines removal, and partnerships with CAL FIRE and other organizations. So anyway, all this by way of saying, we are not the only folks being asked to do stuff. We do have a responsibility, right? And it's a responsibility for our own property, but it's also a responsibility that helps keep the city safe. But I also want folks to know that that we're not the only ones being asked, and it's going to take this kind of coordinated effort across lots of different partners and lots of different organizations. Part of my job is going to be keeping eyes on the ball on all of that and supporting Berkeley Fire Department wherever we can to get them whatever they need to get the job done. So that's the context, but we're here to talk about EMBER. And so without further ado, let me turn it over to Assistant Chief Colin Arnold, who will take us through EMBER.
Thanks, Councilmember. Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see many familiar faces and some new ones. I'm really actually very excited that folks are as familiar with EMBER as they are. That's a sign that you're paying attention, and that's what we're really hoping for, because we want to make sure we're going into this eyes wide open. I want to add, I mentioned to Councilmember Blackaby's staff earlier that, I'm actually a little jealous, and this isn't a sales pitch. I'm living actually down the hill right now with some family that is in the same district, but not inside this new Zone 4. And I'm watching these family members install vents, work on their own Zone 0, take a lot of these mitigation strategies, into practice, in part because they happen to live with somebody from the fire department right now. But they're doing it independent of what's happening with their neighbors. And one of the things that we're seeing is that the most impactful thing we can do is do this collectively. And so what we're proposing here is, in fact, at times requiring work, but also giving folks the opportunity to make sure that that work really matters. So
Yeah.
a brief overview of EMBER. But when we first gave this presentation, this was before the governor's declaration. And a few days after this presentation, they actually came out with a declaration saying by the end of the year, they want to have a zone 0 in place for all of the state. We still don't know what that looks like. We don't know exactly what the values are. We don't know how they're going to implement it, but we are really, we're feeling very empowered that we are moving in the right direction. And in classic Berkeley fashion, we're doing it one step ahead, which I'm really proud of. EMBER has 3 main components. It's got changes to the fire code, changes to the building code, and a reaffirmation of the leave early and staffing models for the fire department. In the fire code, we're talking about establishing a new fire zone within the zone 2 and zone 3, and that would be called zone 4. And that would be you all between Grizzly Peak and Wildcat Canyon Road. Within that zone, along with over in zone 3, which is over in Panoramic, we would require zone 0. I apologize for all the zones and the numbers. It's a mess. We're taking the state's language and our language, we're putting it together. One of the things we're also going to try to do is rename this zone so it's a lot less confusing. We will talk about what zone 0 is here in a minute. Under building code, we want to eliminate the opportunity to repair or replace wood shake roofs so that all wood shake roofs can be eliminated over time. We want to offer opportunities for non-combustible siding, dual pane windows, improvements to structures as often as we can. So that may mean at time of sale, or it may mean during certain renovations. We can't retroactively require the building code. So what we would be proposing is also creating a funding source to incentivize folks to do this work as well, so that people can take it up voluntarily without the large cost of trying to pay for it. And then the last part of EMBER is the leave early and staffing. We, out of LA and out of any other number of wind-driven wildfires, it's been clearly established that there is not an evacuation strategy that is effective or safe if we're waiting until after a fire starts. And so the Leave Early campaign, which many of you probably got notified last year when we did it for the second time in 4 years, is an effort to encourage folks, if they have the ability, to not be in the hills during very extreme fire weather conditions. Before I talk about EMBER, this is a great group to show some of the work that's happening right now. The Grizzly Peak project over on Wildcat Canyon Road. They're most of the way through Wildcat Canyon Road. There's a significant reduction in fuel on both sides of the street that adds to the shaded fuel break on the East Bay Regional Park side of the street, protects the evacuation routes, and reduces the amount of fuel and chances that fire jumps the road. So when you get a chance to drive down Wildcat Canyon Road, if you didn't drive down right before we started the work, you might not notice the difference, but we are taking photos and we look forward to sharing more of those. But it's great to see, and I think the crews are doing a pretty good job of keeping it nice and clean. So one of the things out of LA is it's the home of movies. There's videos galore coming out of LA, and this is a great snip from a crew working on the ground in the middle of the fire. And the reason it's important is because a lot of us think about wildfire as a wall of fire coming into the community and consuming homes and working its way down the hill. And for those of us with experience in this environment, that is not how wildfires translate to urban conflagration. It's done through embers. It's done through millions of small flaming brands that are blown ahead of the fire, that find receptive fuel beds around structures, ignite, and then ignite the structures. So over the course of the night, you are jumping from structure to structure as the next one lights off and the next one lights off. But they are not happening along a line. When you wake up the next morning, you see widespread destruction, but the firefight during the night is about chasing down these spot fires that are lit by embers. A couple of key points here is that your home can be susceptible to embers. Your home can also be the source of the embers. And so we are trying to approach this in 2 ways. One, we want to protect your home from being ignited by embers, which ignite up to 90% of structures in these events. We also don't want your home to become the next source of embers for the surrounding community. This is out of the recent Xylo plan modeling that just was released. We're looking specifically here at your neighborhood. We're looking at conflagration blocks, which is the top slide. What that is doing is the darker the color, the more impact an ignition within that block will have on the surrounding community. So for those of you right up against Wildcat Canyon Road, it is incredibly important that your homes are protected. Speaking plainly, not just for the protection of your own home, but for the protection of everyone downwind from you. The same modeling shows in that lower photo how many other folks in this community rely on you. And so this is not just about us protecting your home, but if we can protect your home, the implications of that are tremendous for the rest of the community. For those of you that listened to the presentation on the 11th, you saw this slide. This is the Miracle Home in Lahaina. It's a really cool story because media looked at this home and then, wow, look at this place. It survived. What a miracle. It was called the Miracle House. And the story behind it is really interesting. It's the owners purchased it 2 years before the fire, recognized that it needed a bunch of work. First two things they did is they replaced the old roof with a metal roof, and they removed vegetation within 5 feet of the structure. The graph that goes along with this house is from a different fire. It is a post-incident analysis of the campfire. That was Paradise. And it looked at what components caused a structure to ignite. And there are 3 highlighted components there that really stand out. That top one is defensible space. Was the home compliant with defensible space standards or not? So if it was not compliant, that whisker graph moves to the right. That home was much more likely to burn. That next blue box down below is the roof construction. The highlighted section down there is wood roofs. So again, with that whisker plot moving to the right, wood roofs much more likely to burn. And the final one down below that is whether the vents on the structure were screened or not. Again, those are the 3 most impactful things that we are seeing out of this event. Window panes is also down below that. That's also a particularly important one. It's a little bit more difficult to do. But those components, if you do not have a Class A non-combustible roof, if you do not have defensible space, you don't have screens over your vents, and you lived in the path of the campfire, your home was much more likely to burn. It's the same story out of Hawaii, thousands of miles away. And this was really impactful for us in doing this research inside of Lahaina. That home that I just showed you, the Miracle House, was right about here. About a mile north is Kahoma Village. It's about a quarter of a mile wide. It's about the average distance between Grizzly Peak Boulevard and Wildcat Canyon Road. Kahoma Village essentially stopped the northward progression of the fire until that fire found a path to the east. This area right here, that village was built in 2017. It was built to modern standards. The homes had defensible space. 5 homes out of those 250 burned. That's great for all but those 5 homeowners. What's equally amazing is what the community just north of that was almost saved from, save for this path of fire that found its way around the side of the village. There it is a little closer. One other thing that we talked about in the council meeting, this is outside of Valparaiso, Chile. Chile does not have the firefighting force of California. When the fire came up to this community, there were no firefighters. This community recognized where they were building, recognized the threat, and so established defensible space, treated the entire community as a single structure so that neighbor worked with neighbor. One neighbor's vegetation was the other neighbor's problem. And so they essentially had defensible space and hardened homes. This fire burned around this community and moved on without a single firefighter being present. And I'm not trying to put myself out of a job, but it's really important to point out that this community fought this fire years before it ever got there, and they won. I believe that's all I have for you with EMBER. Let me just look. Oh no, I got a couple more things. The proposals that we are pursuing or suggesting to council or offering to council are drawn from the same science that The California Department of Insurance Safer from Wildfires Initiative is drawing from, as is IBHS, which is the research arm that informs a lot of the insurance company standards. So what we are trying to do is align our fire code with best practices. It's already being followed under the recommendations of the state, and is how most of your insurance companies, for those of you that have been able to handle your insurance, is how they're assessing risk. So our goal is to align those two things so that we're all playing with the same set of facts. A brief overview of what EMBER would require of you as homeowners. So the existing code is moving in the right direction, but it doesn't have any validated protection from embers or flames. It also, there's a lot of discrepancy in the existing code for the inspecting official to say that, you know, we come up, we look at your home based on the construction of your home, we then make an assessment of the vegetation around your home. So where one neighbor is going to, you know, find out that they have to remove certain vegetation, another neighbor may have really similar looking vegetation that is not required to be removed. That is frustrating, and that is the way the current code is written. What EMBER would do is align that and remove that discrepancy so that everybody is, again, working with the same set of facts. And we are providing folks with the resources to actually make their homes much more resilient to wildfire without having that discrepancy. Really, it's about the first 5 feet of the home. The only vegetation under EMBER that would be permitted currently are 10 movable pots in non-flammable containers, so they can't be in plastic containers. And that's so that on a high fire danger day, you can move those outside of the 5 feet from your home. No combustible furniture that can't be moved. A big one is fences that contact the structure where they are within 5 feet of the house need to be replaced with a non-combustible fence. This one's going to be painful for my family as well, and that's no climbing vines within 5 feet of the structure. So that, you know, the bougainvillea, the wisteria that we love cannot be on the structure. The other points are between 5 and 30 feet of the home. There's reductions in the amount of vegetation that's allowed. No vegetation larger than 10 feet in diameter, and plants are limited to groupings of 3. Again, this is highly prescriptive and unambiguous so that it aligns with all of the evidence and the research that's coming out of a number of different agencies. And speaking of the research that's coming out of a number of different agencies, I was telling this team before the meeting, I've got a 2-inch high stack of reports that we've read through to support the work and to inform the council report. And you'll see a lot of that footnoted in the council report. But if you do nothing else, there's a couple of great things that I think you should take a look at. One is the IBHS Wildland Fire Embers and Flames Home Mitigations That Matter report, which is a great summary of what the post-incident analysis, the hypothesis testing and experimentation have generated in terms of a set of facts, because I keep calling them facts, about what makes your home safer and more resilient to wildfire. And then for those of you that are not interested in reading a scientific paper, which I totally understand, a great movie is Elemental, not the Disney one that my kids love, but this is a different one. It's called Elemental Reimagine Wildfire. It's got a great perspective on what we tried in the past, why it didn't work, where we are at, what we know, and where we need to go in the future. It talks about shaded fuel breaks. It talks about the value of mitigating fuel in the forest. It talks about where the evidence came from and the initial research that went into what it is that we're talking about. It's a great way to spend an hour and a half to educate yourselves on the sort of summary of what's out there. And then if you find that interesting, oh boy, is there a lot of stuff you can go into. So that's a quick down and dirty summary of what EMBER is. The whole point of this presentation was to take questions and hear from the community. So I want to pass it back to you, Councilmember Blackaby, and kick off that process.
Great. Thanks, Chief Arnold. Appreciate it. So good. We do have about half an hour for Q&A, which is great. I know the chief has a hard stop at 7:30, so we'll just try and blitz through as many as we can. If you do have a question, please hit the raised hand icon. I've got a few from the group already, which we'll start with, and then we'll go to the live Q&A. When you hear your name called, just unmute yourself, ask the question, and then you can put yourself back on mute when we're done to move on to the next question. And we'll take as many as we can. I do want to start off with one topic, which is the finances part. Part of it back to what the chief said, which is, you know, we have a responsibility for our own property. Part of this is making our own homes safer and our neighborhoods safer, but we also end up playing a responsibility that protects the rest of the city. And that's why I think part of the financing question is so important, because this is not just about keeping ourselves safe, it's about keeping Berkeley safe. And so we're providing as kind of a public good in a sense for the community. So the financing, I think, is really important. How do we get 100% or near 100% compliance, which is what we need to do to really create this kind of buffer that the chief is laying out? The financing's critical. So the fire department's already secured $1.5 million in grants from CAL FIRE, which can be used for residents that need financial assistance to do the Zone 0 work. But that's just the beginning. I've been talking to Senator Arguin, who chairs the Public Safety Committee. He's obviously well familiar with this issue as former Mayor Berkeley. Assemblymember Wicks is coming up on Friday. We're taking her for a tour starting at the Shasta Fire Station and around the neighborhood to kind of show her, and really leaning on our state partners to try and make this a funding issue, even in a difficult budget environment. Again, this isn't just a Berkeley issue. This is also a statewide issue coming out of LA. I think this is the moment where getting that kind of support to do this kind of work is really important. So part of it is leaning on our partners. We also are thinking about how can we structure some low interest loans, whether through a PACE financing model or a special assessment district or something else. So even beyond the grants or the tax credits or, you know, those other mechanisms, how else can we finish the job and make sure that people can get the resources up front to do the work and pay that back over time? So I'll just say that this is hugely important to me, as much as the fire department is driving fire safety, fire code, building code. Again, it's incumbent on us as policymakers to figure out the financing to get the 100% participation right. So those are a few of the ideas that are kicking around. We're not waiting. We're trying to move this as quickly as we can so that when EMBER comes online, we've got some financing options ready to go so that people have tools in that toolbox. Colin, anything else you want to mention on the grants? I know you had something maybe on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd add that I want to share something really interesting that just came out today or the other day down here. Some of the modeling that we're doing, we're looking also at where some of the challenges are. And this is a slide that shows which structures up in the hills have EMBER resistant siding. So stucco, brick, something like that. And those red areas are areas that need work. So we are well aware that this is not something that we're going to solve overnight. And in no way could we expect this many red dots to do this work on their own without support. To that, I would add that, you know, we've got a meeting tomorrow to pursue some work with a nonprofit and potentially a donor that might also be able to help this work. I don't have any answers on that yet, but, you know, to your point, you're invested in finding the funds, and, you know, the meetings are happening as we speak. So there's also an obligation, a moral obligation that I think we have to not enforce anything that doesn't come with a solution for folks that's reasonable. And to that CAL FIRE grant that you mentioned, I'd also add that, yes, anyone that's medically disabled, financially unable, this includes elderly, have access to the CAL FIRE grant. It's $1 million grant for specifically work on private property that goes into defensible space. It's up to $2,900 per home, and that would cover for most folks most of the work that would need to be done to meet the code.
I'll also say too, like, you know, again, we have 10,000-ish structures in District 6, but this particular zone that we're focused on beginning, this Zone 4 Grizzly Peak mitigation zone, it's about what, 800, 900 homes. So it's also a finite, like, that's solvable. Like financing for 900 homes, like that's a solvable thing. So, you know, we also don't need to make it seem like this is mission impossible. And if we can get this right, then we start moving down the hill, right? And then we start doing the next area. But it's about concentrating resources and concentrating enforcement in those areas to build the buffer for the safety of that part of our community as well as for the rest of Berkeley. One other question, and then we'll get to Maury's question, which is kind of a timing question. How much time?
I don't know what the question is, and it's not relevant. They're going to do the EMBER program soon.
Oh, sorry. how much time do we expect that people will have to conform to zone 0 once we roll this out, Chief? Like, kind of what's the inspection implementation timing that you guys are thinking about?
I kick that back to you, Councilmember. When you know, part of it is, I think, as a part of the EMBER proposal is council needs to give us direction as to when they would like this to take effect. Once that happens, at the point that it would take effect, we would go through our normal inspection cycle. I'll pull that up here just to show folks so that they're aware of it. Nope, that's not it. It's this one right here. Once this goes live, and we've sort of tossed around the idea of January 1st of 2026, we go through the normal inspection cycle. We come up, we do an initial inspection. There's a 60-day compliance window. For folks that qualify for the CAL FIRE grant, that's when that grant starts to take effect. You're not getting any bills, you're not getting any citations until the grant work is completed. So the normal inspection cycle would happen, but there'd be a significant runway. I don't think there's any indication or even desire to have that happen before 2026. Based on the fact that we are already up and running on this year's inspections. You'll all be getting an email here shortly letting you know that we've started the annual cycle.
But at least, look, we'll set expectations, and sooner, more the better. There's also, I know, a big element that you guys are going to be thinking about, which is how do we educate the contractors, the architects, the nurseries, the landscape, like, so that there's an arsenal of resources that people can use to do this work, and that kind of education will also take a little time to get them up to speed.
Absolutely.
Did we lose Maury? I know he was the first one, but maybe we lost him. Lori, do you want to kind of conduct the Q&A?
Sure, would be happy to. I do see you there, Maury. So
Hi.
I'm gonna let you.
Yeah, hey, Maury.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry. Can you see my my video?
Yes.
We can.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, my wife had a question about the maps. The Cal fire map. She was saying is different than the city map, where we're not in a high fire zone, high fire risk zone, or extreme fire hazard zone. Is that the case, that there are two different maps that we're using? One is kind of a city or local designation, and the other one is a state, which looks less of a problem for fire danger? And why would there be a difference there?
Maury, that's a great question, and I'm stoked that people are paying attention to that level of detail, because that's something that our office is mired in, and I never know whether people are aware of that or not. Yes, there's a state map. They released the last one more than a decade ago that shows very high fire severity, and they just re-released the map as an update. As a part of that update, the state looks at modeling and using their internal modeling software, models where there are areas of very high, and moderate hazard from wildfire to a structure. And so based on that, they release these maps, and then every local jurisdiction has the opportunity to adopt the maps as they are or add to them. So we can't make them any smaller, but we can say, based on local knowledge and understanding of our local environment, whether that's the structures that we have, local topography that we need to take into effect, the need for evacuation, all of these factors play a role in whether we decide to suggest to council that we expand that map or leave it as is. One thing that I will say about the CAL FIRE map is that it's modeling the risk of your home to wildfire. And for everybody that's within about a half mile from dense vegetation, in this case, Tilden Park, most of that is in the very high fire danger severity zone. And the actual CAL FIRE map does include everybody in this meeting, and includes Grizzly Peak in totality. It stops just beyond Grizzly Peak. What the CAL FIRE maps don't take into effect is whether your home is in a hazard area, and the hazard that is posed to your home is actually other homes. Once you get more than half a mile from a wildfire, so you're much less likely to ignite from that wildfire. But because of conflagration, because of wildfire moving into the community that it moves into becomes the new EMBER point, which, to the point earlier, for the rest of the community. So our maps do go further, or have gone further in the past, because of that additional risk that we face as a community based on the density of housing, the number of structures, the type of vegetation, what our maps will look like in the future. There's a council item on March 25th, the same night that this EMBER proposal is due to come back. We are hoping to have our own modeling in place to be able to suggest what we would recommend doing with those maps, whether it's expanding them or leaving them as is.
I'll say, look, in the past, we've had expanded maps beyond the CAL FIRE maps, right? Historically, we saw what happened in Altadena, which is, much of the Altadena fire was not in an area that CAL FIRE had considered a very high fire risk zone. So I think there's a very good chance that we will be much more conservative from the perspective of being careful and drawing a map that is more protective than less protective. So, all right, Lori.
All right, next person is Jeff Bloomfield.
I have a bunch of questions and I could, batch them. So in case other people have the same questions, we could be really more efficient with our time if somebody could record the questions.
Yeah, I'll make some notes.
Okay. One is very specific. On the fire mesh, I noted that it doesn't cover roof penetrations such as bath fans, kitchen hood fans. In our particular house, we have a gas-fired water heater in the basement that has, a flue that goes to the roof, and most of the roof vents just have like a little umbrella over them. And I'm wondering if these need to be meshed, but it was not covered in the mesh program description.
Maybe we start with that,
That's
Colin.
the first question.
Let's start with that one, and then Colin. Can we start with that one real quick?
Sure. Great question. The mesh comes in standard sizes that allow you to cover conventional openings. There are some openings, and I know exactly the kind of vent you're talking about, that ceiling circular attic fan that goes up and then comes out on the top, and there's a little mushroom there. For that one, you can order a piece of our mesh that's a smaller diameter and that's cut to that size, and you can actually fit it inside of that vent. I would not, if you're not comfortable being on your roof, I'd absolutely recommend getting a contractor for that one. You can also replace the entire vent with an EMBER resistant vent. That may be the simpler option.
Or self-tapping sheet metal screws and just putting it over the top of the vent.
And you sound like someone, the fact that you said self-tapping sheet metal screws tells me that you've got a plan. That's great. What I would say to the exhaust vents and the plumbing vents, I would be diligent to make sure that you're not covering any vent that needs the airflow out in order to prevent stoppages. So dryer vents, exhaust vents for gas furnaces. Those embers get into those types of vents or into plumbing vents. They're going to go down into your cast iron plumbing and not pose a risk to your house. Those ones don't need to be covered. So
unless you have plastic vents.
Unless you've got a plastic roof vent get into a plumbing system, which would be very modern, and I don't know how it gets up to code out of the roof. But in any case, those other exterior protrusions, make sure you're not inhibiting airflow where it needs to be allowed. Some folks have constructed some very elaborate boxes around some of those so that it doesn't inhibit airflow. But yeah, that's my recommendation.
Okay, thank you. The plants beyond the 4-foot range, like let's say at the interface of the street right away, are succulents okay there or not? Or fire resistant plants? And one of our neighbors has a fire resistant plant book, but does the state or the EMBER program have a list of plants and their acceptability?
Within the 5 feet of the structure, there would be no allowable in-ground vegetation. That would include succulents. For the fact that poorly maintained succulents end up creating dried material, and the background information that we've got that is the same information that insurance companies are using doesn't allow it. And within the right-of-way close to the street, I'm not quite sure. If you're talking about the Grizzly Peak project, we are not removing succulents within 5 feet of or within 10 feet of a roadway or as a part of the Grizzly Peak project, because the roadway itself is not combustible.
Well, within Park Hills. And then this is for another time, but it should be part of EMBER, is parking regulations so that fire engines can pass.
I'll say, and let
I
me take
hope
that one
that-
real quick. Yeah, let me take
Okay.
that one real quick, and then Jeff, what I'd add, and then I want to do a few more, and then we can come back to you. As
Okay,
well.
yes, okay.
On the parking thing, we did move forward an item that's asking the city manager to basically update all the red striping, the no parking zones, add more in consultation with the fire department where we need to restrict parking in areas where we don't have good ingress or egress. Coupled with that is on high fire weather days, do the enforcement. So actually do the towing, right? So like really focus on the enforcement, especially when it's most important to the enforcement. That's a first step. That doesn't get us all the way, but that was part of the package that came on the 11th, and we're moving forward on that because I agree with you that that's important on the evacuation perspective. Although again, Chief Arnold has also well trained me that it's pre-evacuation is still the most important piece here. So evacuating on these like extreme weather days and trying to leave before there's a problem is still desirable because we need fewer people in the hills if and when a fire does come so that those people, the remaining people can evacuate. But yeah, I agree with you that parking and accessibility for fire trucks, we put an item forward, the city manager's got it in the queue in all the red striping that they're doing and enforcement on fire weather days.
Brent, could I give 2 topic sentences? I would need 15
Sure.
seconds. One
Sure.
is, I've heard conflicting reports on the availability of Summit Reservoir, whether it's even in use or not. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah.
And Wildcat Canyon Road, if we assume the fire hopefully isn't coming from the east, my understanding is it and some other roads are still closed.
Got
as,
it. Okay.
an evacuation route. And that's what I have.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. And thanks for those. I'll come back on those too. If I don't have the answer, I'll follow up with you on those. Lori, back to you.
Yeah, the next person is Betty Satin.
Betty, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Oh yeah. Let's see.
Yeah,
Unmute
and Betty, unmute.
See, Betty, can we?
Oh, there, you are still muted, Betty.
There we go. Oh, almost.
There you
Okay,
go.
There we
quick
go.
question. When we got the information about getting the mesh supplies and we called in and it was busy and we never heard back. And other people have said that too. So we got the information, we sent it, or we reported it, the fire inspection number and so forth. We just never were able to get through, and we never got a return call as to what we were supposed to do to pick up the mesh. Should we just go down somewhere? Or what's the best way of getting the
Yeah,
material?
if we have your order, we should have sent you a pickup date and a time to pick it up. But if you can if I can connect you through Councilmember Blackaby, if you can just make sure
We'll take
that
it.
his office has your
Okay,
information,
great. That's
I'll make sure our
fine.
staff reaches out and solves that problem.
Thank you both very much.
Yeah.
You got it. Thank you.
Let me just write that name down.
Thank you, Laurie.
Betty,
And-
Seaton,
Seaton, S-E-A-T-O-N.
I'm sorry?
S-E-A-T-O-N.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, the next question comes from Joan Macquarie.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm concerned about you labeling this fire zone 4 separately and how that could affect our insurance. And I'm also concerned about the boundaries of fire zone 4. It seems to me if embers can fly miles, and we know from the 1923 fire that it burned down to the fountain, that I just don't understand quite why those borders were chosen exactly. Now, I know in the future you plan to go further down the hill, but you know, that's going to be another 10 years.
Right.
And we don't have that kind of time. And I think, and so do you know anything about insurance and putting the big red F on our red 4 on our chests?
I can,
let me start with, go, you start, Colin. I've got some thoughts too. Go ahead.
thanks. With the insurance, the state has mandated the insurance companies cannot take into account the fire hazard severity zones forwarded by CAL FIRE. With that said,
But you're not CAL FIRE.
we're not, but our fire zone is inlaid within the CAL FIRE map. So to Maury's question earlier, your zone is, regardless of whether we call it zone 4 or what we call it, it is in the very high fire danger severity zone as established by CAL FIRE, which is a metric that insurance companies do not use to provide insurance. With that said, both insurance catastrophe modelers and CAL FIRE are playing with the same deck of cards in terms of establishing risk. So we anticipate there being more challenges with getting insurance in these zones, not because you're in the zone, but because the zones correlate with the same risk factors. And the only other thing that I would add to that before turning it over to Councilmember Blackaby is that, yes, it cannot stop at Grizzly Peak. The work cannot stop at Grizzly Peak. It currently includes 9,000 homes. We've got 21,000 inspections, and the work is not happening fast enough the way it is now. The other challenge is that we need collective action within a community to make a community resilient. And so we have to start with a smaller border in order for each individual's person's work to matter in the context of that community. I surely hope that we are not talking about 10 years to get this done. I don't know what the timeline looks like, but we would like to be aggressive about making sure that we're giving you the tools to protect the neighborhood and then moving on very quickly to the next area.
And Joan, look, and I appreciate that. We're not in Park Hills. We've gone through insurance. We all know people who've gone through insurance cancellations. People are losing insurance with or without this designation. I don't think this in and of itself will change the cancellation part. I do think we have a chance if this whole neighborhood adheres to the IBHS standards, and we basically have certified that we've implemented zone 0 across 1,000 homes on the border between Tilden Park and I think that's actually a net positive. I'm not saying it's a net positive right now, but I think it puts us in a lot better position 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the line to say, we've got a whole community that's zone 0. And we've adopted what the insurance industry has said the standard has to be. We did it. So, I think it actually puts us in a stronger position at that point than where we are now, which is we're all at the mercy of getting canceled, at this point. And then to Colin's point, I think on the timing, I'll just say, look, we haven't discussed this in particular, but I think we should look at every year, what's the next batch of homes we're going to do, right?
I think we should have a 5-year plan.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. We should do that. Yeah, it's a great point.
And I think also that people in Park Hills are very aware of what's going on. And a lot of us are very into taking care of our neighborhood and our neighbors.
Yeah.
So it's just the designation that concerns me.
I hear you. That makes sense. I appreciate that feedback. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Me too. Point taken, and I'll work on better ways to frame that, especially for the way it's written.
All right, the next question comes from Palin.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
First, thank you for this forum. It's really helpful and educational. I have two very just action-oriented questions. Being we moved here a couple years ago, so we're just trying to get plugged into this now. The one is just, is there a resource or we can call upon if we wanted to walk through? I know sometimes the fire inspectors come and they leave a note, but if we actually wanted to be able to walk through with them, we have some really old trees that are close to the house, and before ripping them out, I'd love to just talk through some of that with someone. So there are resources for that. And then do you have any advice for how we can be more persuasive with neighbors? We have one neighbor with a lot of overgrown hedges coming into our property, and just in the past, they haven't been willing to take on that cost. And so he's comfortable if we do it, but just in the interest of fire safety and year over year, that obviously becomes a bigger expense. Those are my two questions.
Yeah, great questions. We don't have the capacity to individually schedule inspections. We do know when we're going to be generally in the neighborhood, and that we follow the schedule on the website. You'll also be getting an opportunity this year to sign up ahead of time to allow us access to your property, 360, so we can walk into your backyard. If you sign that right of entry, we'll do the full inspection and look for any violations. We still knock on the door. We still, check to see if you're home. Hopefully you are, because we like walking with you. But if that ROE is signed, then you do get that 360 inspection. Once you have that report, you can always call into the office and ask about it as well. But I don't have anything better than that for that point. In terms of your neighbor's hedge, the stuff that's on your property, you have every right to mitigate if it's on your side of the fence. With that said, the EMBER regulations in theory would, I don't know exactly what the situation looks like, but might address some of that from a fire code perspective. The most effective thing we found is continuing to build that relationship and talk about the value to your home, to your family's safety. That turns out is way more effective than somebody with a badge showing up and writing a ticket. I know it's not the answer that you want. The other thing I would do is point them to our website, berkeleyfiresafe.org. Marin FireSafe has some really good resources as well. There's a lot of good stuff in there in terms of information.
And also, like, again, this is just another reason we can't let the finances stand in the way of getting the work done. So we need to break down that barrier. So it's not like, okay, well, I'm not going to be out X $1,000 or more, right? So that hopefully will help. I mean, again, that may not solve it all, but hopefully that will help. Colin, on the first point, suggest maybe, I think what would be interesting coming out of this discussion is, rolling, we should set up a series of like implementation workshops. Like, again, bring in an arborist, bring in the contractor, like, here's very practical nuts and bolts ways of like how to do this work so people can get these kinds of questions answered. I think we'll need to, do that kind of work as well. So
and then Colin, can you just clarify where on the website we can find that schedule you were referencing, and whatever it is we sign up for the ROE?
Yeah, it is berkeleyfiresafe.org, and then under defensible space inspections, if you scroll down, you can click on learn more.
Okay.
And it shows you when the schedule is that we're going to be in your neighborhood.
And just to add to that, for me to get the mesh to put on over my vents, I had to get the full access inspection. They had just done the front of the house, and then they said we're going to be coming out to your neighborhood in these days. And I did the walkthrough with the fire department person in the rain, and he pointed everything out, like the fences that are wooden that are close to the house and need to be replaced. And the other thing is, his standards were not as stringent as the EMBER's program. He was like, oh yeah, those camellias are great next to the house. They're flowering. There's not a lot of dry debris coming off of it. But I think this program is going to be a lot more severe than what he was recommending as optional things to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Next question is for Sudeepa.
Hi, yes. Just a couple of action-oriented questions as well. Is there a city recommended list of contractors we could work with to do some of this fire hardening work?
The city doesn't actually specifically recommend anybody. We're not allowed to recommend specific contractors for vegetation work. I actually don't have anybody off top of mind. I do know that if you there's a number of contractors that we work with, all of which are good. I'm not sure where that list would be or who's been approved by council, but we unfortunately don't have a specific list.
And I'll come back. It is going to be part of this where we're going to be educating local contractors. So like part of this is trying to get as many people up to speed so that hopefully most of the local folks will have this knowledge. So anyway, but yes, we can work on that list or trying to figure out. And there are other organizations like the Berkeley Fire Safety Council and others that aren't the city of Berkeley that will probably have access to more of those lists as well because they're private enterprises.
Got it. Another quick question. Is there any recommendation around replacing wood fences with metal fences?
Absolutely. Within 5 feet of the structure, we'd recommend replacing the metal fence. Best practices would also include replacing any wooden fence that's within 5 feet of a structure, whether it contacts the structure or not. So fences that are parallel. Metal fences, fiberglass, anything non-combustible would be good. But part of EMBER would be replacing the sections that are within 5 feet of the structure. with something non-combustible.
All right, perfect. Thanks.
Colin, I know
Okay.
do you have time for one more question, Colin? I know you got to leave soon.
Go for it. I'm just letting them know I'm a few minutes late.
Okay, great.
right.
Go ahead, Lori.
Okay, Kushan?
Hi, yes, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I had two quick questions. So one, I looked through some of the material that was sent in advance of the meeting, and it mentioned I think no trash receptacles or recycling within zone 0. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that. And then my other question was I know we've been talking about vegetation removal, but we all, like, I guess most of us live on hills or slopes. So I'm wondering if landslides and drainage has been considered when in the vegetation removal, as well as the grant amounts, potential grant amounts, because I think just removing vegetation might cost $3,000, but if you have to factor in drainage, then you're probably looking closer to 10, 15, something like that.
Great questions. Taking them in order, the trash cans, plastic trash cans full of trash would be considered combustible within 5 feet of the structure. So the EMBER proposal would require that they're kept outside of those 5 feet based on their contents and their construction. And then your second question about considering erosion, absolutely a concern, especially when you're dealing with trees or really large vegetation. We would want to be sensitive to that. One of the main components of EMBER is in the first 5 feet around the structure, where generally you're either under the drip line of the house or near the initial drainage of the house anyway. There's not any evidence to suggest that clearing out those first 5 feet really presents a major erosion problem. But I'm sure there are some structures in Berkeley where that's something we need to be cognizant of, and it's something we take into effect.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, next question is from Ken Critch. Ken, can you unmute yourself? Are you still there, Ken?
Yes, I'm here. I'm curious.
Perfect.
Okay. Specific question. We had a contractor give us a bid for a metal fence, but he wants to keep the wooden post and put a metal sheathing around it. Is that allowed?
No.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would come back to what the code would suggest is the first 5 feet have to be non-combustible. So if the contractor has can demonstrate that they have made that post non-combustible by otherwise covering it in non-combustible material or changing the makeup of it, then that would count. Yeah, if the wood's otherwise protected from ignition, we'd take that. It's a great idea.
And the second point, general one, Marin Avenue is a big egress point for evacuation. It's customarily people don't park there, but sometimes people do. If people were to park on both sides of the street, it would be a one-lane road. So I wonder if Councilman Blackaby might consider the no parking on one side of Marin.
Councilmember Blackaby, I'm going to leave that one with you. I've got to take off for this other meeting. For folks who still have questions that specifically pertain to me, if you can just collect them and fire them off to me, and I'll get back to you at some point later tonight or tomorrow.
Could we have your email?
Sure, absolutely. It's CARNOLD at berkeleyca.gov. So CARNOLD at berkeleyca.gov. You can only send me stuff if it's nice. No, I'm just kidding. Please, any questions you have, we're here for you. I look forward to getting them and getting back to you as quickly as I can. And I'm sorry I got a jet.
Thanks, Chief. I'll stay on for a few minutes, but thank you, Chief. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. I can take a few others, especially if there are if they're very implementation fire specific for the chief. Reach out to me, send me an email, and I will get those answered. If there are questions, kind of more policy, kind of the general stuff, in terms of what we're thinking about from the council level, I'm happy to take those. But implementation stuff, I think Chief Arnold's going to be better, suited for. So
the next question comes from James Arms. Oh, sorry, Jason.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation and for your work on this. Mine are a little bit more for the chief, but I'll just say them and I'll follow
Sure.
up with an email.
Sounds good. Yeah.
For the previous one with the fence as well, I've gone through the research articles for fence and how fire spreads, and all of them are with wood cladding and the wood frame.
Yep.
And so just trying to get clarity on if the wood frame can stay, because I know that
Got
that
it.
can be a lot more expensive, as well as I personally treated my fence with a fire retardant that was CAL FIRE rated and ICC compliant. And so understanding if something like that could also be allowed, understanding that a lot of people have wood fences and may have just replaced them. And so that would kind of be my first one. I'll follow up in an email with you.
Great.
And then the other
Thanks.
one too is being in construction and development. A lot of codes are conflicting. And so understanding how Zone 0 will work with native plants such as like heritage oaks and other trees or that are protected from being removed, and just trying to understand how that would be implemented within the policy.
Thank you. Those are both good, and I can get answers to those.
Great.
And so my email is bblackaby@berkeleyca.gov, but we'll put it up at the end as well. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah. All right, let's see. Feldman.
Hi there.
Hey.
Chelsea is my name. Feldman
Chelsea,
is
hi.
my name. Hey. So we definitely appreciate the efforts to mitigate fire hazards, and I just want to speak from the perspective of a gardener. We moved into our house about 13 years ago. We're on Middlefield Road, and we have been really cultivating carefully and thoughtfully and putting a lot of effort into a native plant and medicinal herb garden, which is not landscaping. It's a part, like an integral part of our family life. And so, you know, sort of what the last speaker was saying, I think his name was Jason, like for us, the idea of some of these plants needing to be removed is not, it's not a straightforward request for us. These are plants that we've been cultivating with intention and care for over a decade. And, you know, so there's that piece of like wanting to maintain that, what we really feel like is a legacy in our family. And in the summertime, when it's really hot up here, when we come into our yard, the effect ecologically of the plants in our yard is it's considerably cooler, like 20 plus degrees cooler in when you're inside the garden. And so just from that standpoint of, you know, thinking about not having that buffer of moisture and cooling plant life around the house actually feels a little more confusing. But I want to make sure that we're being thoughtful about these requests when it's not just a question of like moving plants around and putting things in pots, but like when it's part of the fabric of people's life and identity to be in relationship with their garden.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And is the herb garden, and does it continue to within 5 feet of the house? Just so again, I'm just trying to picture this in my head.
So when you walk out it depends on where you're considering the start of our house. Is it from our front door or where the eave of the house hangs down?
It's basically I believe it's from the perimeter of the actual house itself, the vertical of the house, exterior of the house.
The walls or the
walls.
5
feet long.
I mean, some of that is beyond 5 feet, but certainly not 30 feet or more. And for me, the idea of having plants that are like no more than 3 together and no more than 10 inches, like that demonstrates to me a lack of understanding of like what a garden is and what an ecosystem is, if you're talking about.
Sure.
So I just like, to me, there just really needs to be a lot more attention for those of us for whom gardening and maintaining relationship with the land we're tending in our, you know, little box of land here in the Berkeley Hills. It's, I just want to elevate that concern and
Okay.
to know that somebody is going to not just come in and start kind of with red tape saying you need to get rid of
I
these
hear you.
things, but that they're going to work with us and
Yeah, I hear you.
we can create some pathway to understanding there.
That is really good feedback. And I will say historically, kind of in this process with BFD, what I found is, and the sign, they're really focused on the 0 to 5. I actually do feel like there's probably a little more flexibility kind of from in the 5 to 30 range as well, especially if we can sort of demonstrate how that would work. So again, I'm not gonna, so this feedback is helpful because as we kind of work with them to sort of put it in the code, we can think about the kind of flexibility that may or may not be possible there. But because I appreciate like what you're saying, and we need to be able to honor that and figure out if we can accommodate that and make that happen. I do feel like it's the 0 to 5 is what they're really concerned about. And the 5 to 30, it's like, well, and if you can kind of reduce the hazards in that zone, that's also helpful. But it's really like having stuff on fire right around the perimeter of the house that's going to catch the house on fire within that 5-foot zone. That's like, that is their number one concern, is like, can the embers hit the bounce off and not catch the roof on fire, right? Can the embers not go into the vent and go inside the house, right? Can the windows be such that they don't break in the extreme heat and give access to the inside of the house to catch on fire? So they're trying to make the house itself as impervious to fire. And part of keeping it impervious is not having this huge heat source within 5 foot of the house that no matter what you do it's gonna be really hard to stop from catching the house on fire. What happens in that 5 to 30 feet, again, I'm not a practitioner of the science, but what happens from that 5 to 30, I think there is more openness there. It's the 0 to 5, I think there's a lot of concern about.
I appreciate that. And I think just, you know, to tack on, for us, we have a wooden fence, and without that wooden fence, our garden will not make it in this neighborhood due to all of the things that want to come in and eat the garden. So it's all like, there's just a lot of layers right now of concern and consideration.
And I'll say on the wooden fence part, I'll even just say too, like, they also don't necessarily say you don't have to replace the whole fence. They're concerned about the 0 to 5 foot of the fence touching the house. So if you put a gate, if you change out that part of the fence, if the fence catches on fire and it's more than 5 feet away from your house, they're less concerned about it than if the fire catches and wicks the fire all the way to your house directly. So if you can create distance or some other material that's non-flammable in that 0 to 5 foot along the fence line, again, that's, I think, less of a concern to them, right? So they're not saying replace the entire wood fence. They're saying replace the part that's from 0 to 5.
Got it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing. No, I appreciate that. That's really good feedback. Thank you. Zora.
Yes, if there are trees, medium to large trees within 5 feet of the house, and one gets them taken down, do the roots have to come out also?
Find out. I think they're most concerned about what's coming out, obviously, of the ground than the roots themselves, unless the roots can, right? I guess, you know, depending on the varietal, something else can come out of the root.
But I know
So
that
I can ask them.
I know that roots can catch fire.
Yeah. I'll find out. Don't have the answer. Thank you. Yeah. Hi, Carol.
Hi. Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions specifically related to vegetation, like particularly the last thing of the no more than 3 groupings of 3 with nothing larger than 10 feet diameter. Now, you're not talking about mature trees there, are you?
Right. No. Yeah.
So you're not talking about mature trees.
No, I don't think so. No.
But you don't want branches within that 5 foot diameter.
That's right.
Or 5 foot. Okay, and then, and privacy hedges, so when you're talking about wooden fences and privacy hedges, again, so some privacy hedges may be okay as long as they're 5 feet, at least 5 feet away from the house, is what I'm getting.
Right. The farther away, the more acceptable it will be from the code perspective. I can't tell you exactly, but again, they are really concerned about everything from in the 0 to 5 foot range. So absolutely no vegetation, right? Anything that can catch on fire in that range. Again, I think there was a slide in his presentation where I think, again, they're not welcoming. They would discourage a lot of privacy hedge all over lots of parts of the property. But again, I think we have more wiggle room as we get farther away from the house.
So the 10 feet in diameters, you wouldn't want like a whole mass of bushes.
Right.
Or
Right. For example.
Okay, so we've been talking about EMBER, but of course, there's the Grizzly Peak project that he mentioned, and the right-of-way issue. And a lot of us, of course, have privacy hedges and wooden fences probably within that right-of-way. So is that going to be kind of scorched earth?
Right now, like again, as part of the Grizzly Peak project, they're not, if there is a privacy hedge or a fence in the public right-of-way, they are not removing it, but they are tagging it and notifying you that there is something in the right-of-way that you need to, take a look at. And they're sort of deferring enforcement on that for now.
Means remove, I assume.
Yeah, but I mean, they're not doing it. They're not, it's like, so again, they're not they are not going to do anything with it in the immediate term. Like if you have a fence in the right of way, if you have a privacy hedge in the right of way, they're going to let you know, but they're not going to remove it. They're going to tag it and let you know that they would like you to remove it. Yeah.
Right. And okay. And they'll let us know, like we could move it so far back. I mean, if we wanted to replant a hedge or something back further,
right.
And wooden fences are also part of that. Is that true?
Wooden fence, if they don't want, if it's the public right of way, yes, they're concerned about they're concerned about access in the public right of way, right? And there's been a long period of time where sort of it's been a little bit laissez-faire in the public right of way. And I think they're saying from an evacuation standpoint and from a hazardous vegetation perspective, they're trying to, I think, clean some of that up in the public right of way.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. A couple more and then we should go. We'll try and get through Marjorie and then we should wrap up. And then happy to take more questions offline and please contact me anytime. Jerry.
Ongirth. Question is whether recycled plastic timber is considered acceptable as a replacement for wood.
I will find out. I do not know. Recycled plastic timber?
Yes.
All right.
I currently have a deck that has it's attached to the house. It's integral, has wooden support members that would be difficult to replace. But decking itself is recycled plastic.
Okay. I'll find out.
It is
Thank you.
Technically flammable, but it would not ignite the way wood would.
Right. Okay. I'll find out about that particular material. I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Yeah. David Johnson. David, you're on mute. If you can unmute yourself.
You did now?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, that's good. I have a very general point that I would like you to take back to the council, actually, which is that I think it's absolutely critical to find a way for the city and the park district to work together on fire safety. The report that was presented to the council in early February assumed a fire beginning in the canyon, and then just spent time talking about why the houses along the front line, which is Park Hills and the rest of Zone 4, should be made as hardened as possible. Of course, we all want that. Of course, it's very important. But it would be short-sighted not to try to think about ways to mitigate any fire that does begin in Wildcat Canyon, so that when it does reach us, it won't be as terrible as it might have been. And the work that's been done by Xyloplan suggests a first step. They have identified what they call fire paths. Those fire paths are in park property. It would seem sensible to try to reduce fuel loads on those fire paths as a first step in mitigating the severity of any big fire under bad conditions that will come up the canyon wall and hit us.
David, let me take that. So you're absolutely right. And one of the reasons that the department has engaged with Xyloplan is to identify some of those most likely paths, to then also share that and work with the park district. It's impossible for them to take out all of the hazardous fuel from the entire park right away. We know that, right? But it allows them to sort of focus their efforts on the most likely historical fire paths and where the places it's most likely to come. So I'm with you. It sort of gives them a way to prioritize the work that has to be done, rather than say, do it all. We say, like, start here on these most likely paths and then move to the other places as you get time. So I totally agree with you. I guess what the department would say is yes, and, right? Yes, and the park district should do that. And we need to do our part too, because no matter what, like, we can't eliminate the threat from the park entirely, even if they had an unlimited amount of funds, because we're built right along the WUI. I mean, we're still, and as folks have mentioned before, embers can fly a long ways. And so we're right in that zone, no matter what the park district does, and they should do more. And like I said, Elizabeth Eccles was on earlier. She's advocating for that internally. We're working together. Their fire chief is spending millions of dollars on that in this next year. They also have a long perimeter to defend that goes all the way down into Oakland, right? Like, and farther south, right? They have a whole ridge line to defend, right? But I agree with you. My point is, I agree with you. But I also don't think we can afford to wait for that work to be done.
Oh, no. I wasn't suggesting that at all.
Okay.
I was simply highlighting the fact that the core background, or the core of this danger to us and then to the rest of Berkeley, really starts down in there. Now, of course, the park district is enormous. They have all sorts of problems. They have to have the funds. They have been raising funds and been raising money. I've talked to the chief a couple of times about this. But what's the issue? It really is the dividing line between the city and the park, and these two separate jurisdictions. And the seeming and the ideal is to somehow find a way for them to work together, whether it even, God forbid, means sharing funds.
I'm with you.
Something like that. Something like that.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. It's good feedback, and we all need to be working more together on this. Like many other issues in Berkeley, whether it's homelessness or anything else, these are not completely localized to our borders. It requires regional coordination. That's why this East Bay Wildfire Coalition of Governments that Susan started last year has been so important, because it's also not about just what we do. What's Kensington doing? What's Richmond doing? What's Oakland doing? Like, we all, in addition to the park district, all of these jurisdictions, we interlock, and we're dependent on what they do.
Just one final follow-up thing.
Sure.
precisely, I was excited to hear about the East Bay Wildfire Coalition of Governments. Does it include the Park District?
They present and are part of, they have a seat. Yes.
Okay.
They're part of it.
All right.
Okay, we have two
thanks, Dave.
final questions. Betty Satan.
Betty Seaton again. Yeah, Betty Seaton. Betty there?
Okay, there we go. Quick question. If a fence is on a neighbor's property and it's within 5 feet of your house, what happens?
I mean, I think the way the fire department would say it is that the 5 feet is really kind of around all of the structures. So if your neighbor's house and their fence is within 5 feet, that is absolutely in the 5-foot zone, and that fence needs to be removed. How the financing of that would work, let me take that back. But it would absolutely, if it's more than 5 feet from their home, but it's less than 5 feet from your home, yes, that needs to be dealt with. So let me get the answer to the responsibility, because I don't have that right now, and then bring it back to you.
Great. Thanks so much for this. We really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
Yep, you got it.
Last question is from Marjorie Cruz.
Hi, can you hear me?
We got you.
Okay, great. I live in the house that was hit by the mudslide in 2023 down below Zaytuna College. And we are still dealing with the impacts of that massive mudslide. But one of the things that I want to bring up that was sort of touched on before by one of the other neighbors was when you remove trees and vegetation, you affect the ability of the soil to absorb water. And one of the things we've noticed here, and we've had our geologist out many times dealing with the ensuing problems, is that Zaytuna College came in and cut down a ton of trees after the mudslide. Many of them were damaged and they had no choice. Now all of a sudden we have massive amounts of water running down the hill after the rainstorms. We are waiting for a mitigation, but I just want to bring this up because as people go around considering what they need to do in terms of vegetation removal, tree removal, engineers who are knowledgeable about the soil conditions in this area, all of the underground aquifers that are running through all of these hills, that needs to be considered because we could end up being fire safe and mudslide prone very, very quickly. Eucalyptus trees suck up an incredible amount of groundwater, and they help to stabilize our hillsides as much as they provide, access points for fires to start. So there's a pro and a con, and I think that while we're considering this, we really need to bring in soils engineers and have them be part of this discussion so that we don't turn our neighborhood into, like I said, a fire safe neighborhood that is mudslide prone. And that's all I want to say.
Thank you. No, thank you for that. One thing, and you're absolutely right. We need to be giving consideration. By the way, 20 years ago, all of the building code and so much of our focus was on how do we make our homes and our neighborhoods earthquake safe, right? And so I'm also sensitive to the fact that, by the way, we know we are in a real fire hazard area. We do need to take this seriously. We need to do the work optically and not be aware of the other impacts that might be coming as a result. So I'm sensitive to what you suggest. Also, looking at the work of what the Berkeley Fire Safe Council has been doing, just as one example, because I'm familiar with it and was just talking about it the other day. It's also why they've moved a little bit away from just removal, but also removal and replanting with native vegetation. And so if you look at a lot of the projects they did last year, yes, they removed various groves of hazardous eucalyptus, and then they also went back and replanted and kind of tried to stabilize the hillside where those trees were and plant with native vegetation that would be more sustainable over time. It would also replace some of the positive benefits that the eucalyptus had also provided. And so I think about thinking about it more holistically. Sierra Club has a similar approach to kind of dealing with these non-native species like eucalyptus, which is not just removal, but also thinking past that. So I appreciate the comment. I share the concern, and we can't sort of, cut off our nose to spite our face, right? You choose the
Right.
metaphor.
Right.
But I appreciate that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marjorie. And Lori, I know we had one more. Why don't we take Kuniko as the last one, and then we'll got all the raised hands.
Okay.
Hi, I think I'm on.
Yep.
Yes, last question. You're closing the question, so make it a good question. You're the last questioner.
Well, it's a quick question. First of all, thank you for hosting this meeting. It has been very informative and helpful. My question is, and this may be because we were in a home association, is there any chance of having street sweeping service here? Because we have deciduous trees around here, and when they drop their leaves, I'm out on the street sweeping a lot, and I know other neighbors sweep too, but sometimes it's impossible to keep up with the leaves. And I can, on some weekends, I can easily fill my own green can and part of a neighbor's green can with leaves. So is there any chance of having street sweeping here, please?
Lori, and I remember we've talked about this, and you may have the answer more readily at hand at this point in terms of, the vehicles and sort of the support for street sweeping.
Yeah, we could check in with Public Works. In the past, when I've asked about street sweeping, not specifically in Park Hills, but in other parts of the hills, they just didn't have the vehicles couldn't really get into all the curvy places to do the street sweeping.
Oh.
But we could see if that is true for Park Hills.
I'll make a note. And
if you could just look into that again, please.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that we have a list of items that we, including street walks, traffic safety. We've got a running list of items that we follow up with Public Works on a daily, if not more frequent basis, so we can add this to our check-in list with them. So, listen, it's been an hour and a half. I just want to thank everyone. Like the fact that we still have 50 neighbors on after 90 minutes of wildfire safety and very detailed questions. I appreciate everyone's participation. We are all kind of in this together. I do want you to know that. And like I said, I live at Grizzly Peak, kind of between Marin and Keeler. I'm in this zone, right? I'm here, and what's affecting, what they're asking, what the fire department is asking us to do affects all of us. And it's important that we get this right. If you do have any other questions, concerns, ideas, I do want to hear them. We have a couple more weeks to continue to kind of adjust this before the fire department presents this on the 25th. We're going to have another District 6 kind of whole district town hall on March 20th. Again, we're just trying to reach into as many different neighborhoods and talk to as many people as possible to make sure that we have everyone's feedback before we really take this into consideration on the 25th. So thank you for making the time. If you do need to reach me or reach Lori or Hannah in my office, email me. It's bblackaby@berkeleyca.gov. You can also find my contact information on the City Council section of the City of Berkeley website. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks to Chief Arnold again for participating, and that we will be in very frequent contact over the coming weeks as we move forward on this. So thank you for your time, and have a good evening. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you very much.